Hey, let's go out to Mark Meredith. He's at the White House. Mark, we have confirmation now. We know that it's been a while, almost 500 days, but the White House said a couple of weeks ago that Evan Gershkovich, they're not forgetting him, and now it looks like we're getting him back.
Brian, you're right. The White House had made a pretty formal statement about this situation just a few weeks ago when Gershkovich was convicted because he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. They put out a statement that the president said that he had no other higher priority than getting both Evan as well as Paul Whelan and other Americans wrongfully detained back home. We know that they had been working through the United Nations. I remember there was the UN ambassador who had just made a pretty fiery speech about this same situation. So obviously the White House will come out to not only say here's what happened, but I would also imagine to show that they were able to get this accomplished. There are going to be a lot of people asking, well, was the cost appropriate? What in terms of we had to give the Russians? And since we simply don't have those details yet, nobody's really able to chime in on that part. But I want to bring up what you mentioned is that President Biden, in his own words, just 2-3 weeks ago, had said, Evan has endured his ordeal with remarkable strength. We will not cease in our efforts to bring him home. And then again, the indication that they are going to be able to do just that. You mentioned that we haven't really seen the president much this week. He was in Austin, Texas for that speech at the LBJ Library. He spoke to reporters just a little bit when he got back in late the other night. They kept his schedule pretty open today, maybe an indication that they knew this was likely to happen and that they would have a chance to allow the president to go out before the cameras and to share some news. You also mentioned the campaign trail, guys, which I thought was interesting because former President Trump has brought up the situation before multiple times and said that he would be able to get Evan Gershkovich back home if he was put back into the White House. I just checked Trump's social media accounts. Haven't seen any reaction to him yet. But no matter what, this is going to have a sweeping implication between U.S. and Russian relations going forward. And you have to wonder whether or not this is the continuation of hostilities, or will this be the beginning of something perhaps a little bit brighter, if you will, of a relationship. But given, of course, the war in Ukraine, I can't imagine that truly to be the case. Steve Ansley and Brian, so we are still waiting from the official details on what's happening with the White House schedule for the day, but there's a big gap there, which if I had to bet all my money that we'll hear from President Biden at some point today, guys.
I bet you're probably right. And Mark, you were talking a little bit about the White House has been talking over the last couple of weeks. That's because, and we saw Evan Gershkovich being convicted. He was in the glass box there in that Moscow courtroom. And he had kind of, at times, a wry smile because he knows this is how it works. If he's going to wind up as part of a prisoner deal, which apparently he is, he's got to be convicted. And so once the conviction happened, then, we're off to the races.
Absolutely. And you're right that there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm sorry, the lawnmower's going because, of course, why not right now? But you're right. In terms of the way that it has worked in the past, if it was to be any indication of where we are today, just like we have seen with previous prisoner exchange deals, they were waiting until they had that leverage. But I would also be curious to see how much President Biden is able to say what was happening behind the scenes, or whether or not they're simply going to focus on the final result, and whether other Americans will also be included in this exchange. Obviously, we've been talking about the two names that we have been able to confirm, but whether or not there was other people on the sidelines, maybe potentially with other nationalities that also could be related to this, that is still to come out. And I keep checking our headlines here. We'll likely get a readout from the White House, the National Security Council, the UN. I mean, we're going to have plenty of people talking about this, but whether or not we wait for the president to say first, guys, that's